And welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of To Ashes You Say, the companion podcast of the Phoenix Games Club. I am Nick, your host, and joining me this evening, as usual, are Chairman Ciaran and Treasurer Andy. But we also have a special guest, our first guest, a man by the name of Spon. How are we doing, gentlemen?
Very good.
All good here?
Same here.
So this episode primarily is going to be covering the second part that we led on from our previous episode. Our previous episode, as I'm sure many of you will remember, was dealing with running pre-published adventures. This evening we are going to be talking about designing our adventures. But before we get into that, Spon, as our first guest,
Hello.
How did you get into RPGs, sir?
Well, I was about 10 or 11. First year senior school. People were playing, all gathered round a table, I think in the physics lab at lunchtime, rolling strange dice and moving strange metal miniatures around a map. And I sort of poked my head round the door and said, "What's this?" And they said, "It's called Dungeons and Dragons. Do you want a game?" And from just been playing since then. Basically 4/5 of my life.
Sounds a bit like how I ended up finding it as well. Was your first game D&D?
Basic D&D, yeah.
We're going to start this off with, as from the previous episode at least, we're going to start this off with looking at conventions and one-shot games. Spon in particular has had a lot of experience with doing this, but we will start the conversation off with Ciaran.
So, I'm going to be talking to you about the adventure hooks that you can use for these one-shots and convention games. So, the important thing with convention and one-shot games is usually the timescale. So normally, if you're running sort of a full adventure, the hook can be a little bit more elaborate. You can spend time and get the players involved and let them find the hook. With one-shots and convention games, time is a luxury. As such, it's more important for you to be able to get the players into the adventure as quickly as possible. So for this reason, the hook needs to be very simple and quick. So this could usually begin by you literally starting the characters inside the dungeon.
Well, just before we kind of get too far off it, roughly what sort of time frame are we speaking? Like, how long do you tend to have?
So normally with convention games, the slots tend to last for around 4 hours, sometimes 3, or less in certain conventions. So it's normally important to try and get players into the action and involved as quickly as possible. So, for example, at the London Gaming Convention, Tabletop Gaming Convention, which all of us have been to, the time slots we have are normally around 4 hours in a morning and afternoon slot. And unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions, WinterCon has no physical presence this year. However, they do have an online event they're planning. But normally what would happen is you have players that come along and join your games.
Dragon meat.
Sugar, yes, Dragon Meat, not WinterCon. WinterCon was another convention that got cancelled.
It was indeed.
Far too many this year. Sorry, Dragon Meat is the London Tabletop Gaming Convention, which all of us have been to. So normally the way I like to do my hook is when the players come there, it's usually either a find and retrieve, so you send the players into a dungeon to retrieve an object, or go kill this monster. So I start with a little sort of monologue about what the players are going to be doing and say, so a day ago you were hired by X to go and kill X. And it normally works quite well.
It does need to be very, very simple, because if the players need to sit around for 15-20 minutes trying to work out what they're doing, that's 15-20 minutes that they're essentially trying to find out what they're doing and they're not playing.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's you don't have to make it exactly. You don't have to tell them exactly what they have to do, but you have to give them an initial in. So, for instance, if they're in the dungeon, you put them at the start of the dungeon, and if you say you've got to retrieve the key of Doom, they don't know where the key of Doom is, but they know it's in the dungeon. When I run Cthulhu games, there's usually a mystery, and they may not know what the mystery is, but there's always something for them to do at the start that will lead them into the mystery.
So I think that's generally it for hooks, is basically just keep it simple and keep it quick. Because for one-shots and conventions, these aren't players, might not be players, that are going to be in sort of repeat adventures. I've had people that come back each year and tend to especially at WinterCon, the other convention I mentioned, you tend to get a lot of repeat people each year. But it does need to be simple and quick and get your players into the game and playing quickly.
And this also can apply not only to convention games, but if you're just running what we call one-shots for friends, who are usually going to have a lot more experience within kind of genre, within role-playing, but is still going to follow a lot of the same caveats.
Nicely.
So, we do, at least with the club anyway, we do occasionally run some one-shots, which is something I have more experience with when it comes to running games, at least. Fortunately, for the most part, with those kind of games, I'm usually joined by players that know me as a GM, and people that I know as players quite well, and we could tend to get things done, shall we say.
Yeah, but you won't necessarily have that, how can I say, experience at a convention. You could have 4 to 6 people you've never met before and you've got no idea how they mesh or anything like that. So with convention games, yeah, keeping it simple is usually the best move.
Well, actually, because this I think potentially segues into our next thing, which is kind of taking this entire hook and turning it into something that you're running. So how I tend to do this is almost like a skeleton approach. So bear in mind that with one-shots and with convention games, you have about 4 hours. So you're going to get, on average, 3 to 4 scenes. And with that in mind, you can sort of construct your adventure. So, you can have, okay, this is where they're being told the quest. This is where they're on the way to it and they're ambushed. This is where they get to the throne room, they have a boss fight. This is where they get the treasure and leave. And you can then, those are kind of 4 key scenes that you want to happen. And then you can build up the encounters and what happens in each of those scenes. And it's also short and snappy, so you can sort of progress people through at a quick pace. People aren't kind of going off fishing partway in. For example, if I use an example of when I ran to a con, I ran a game called 13th Age, which is essentially Dungeons and Dragons. And the 4 scenes of there was they were told to investigate a town which had gone silent. They went to the town and were ambushed by townspeople that were mind controlled. They then got to the cavern or the kind of rundown castle, and they fought the boss, who was essentially this sort of psionic mind flayer creature. And that was the adventure. They defeated the boss, they got the treasure, they went home.
When it comes to running one-shots, at least, and convention games, simple mechanics are important. Especially if it's, at least with Spon, who I'm going to introduce this topic more into, but I think it's important to recognise that when you're making a convention game, you need to make it assuming the players don't know the game. So how would you get around that, Spon, in terms of keeping a game simple for new players, but bringing in experienced players that will know the game as well?
It's a difficult line. I mean, there's to start with, you could mark it as being this game is written assuming you know the rules of such and such, but you can't guarantee that. You can't guarantee you get any players that way. And with new games, you have to assume no one will know it. But the thing to do, especially if you're showcasing a new game, is basically take something basic like combat and have a nice simple combat, but take it slowly. Take everyone through it. Say, you're rolling to hit, and then if you hit, you'll do damage. And if you're playing, let's say, 5th Ed, if it's 5th Ed and you say no knowledge is expected, make it a low-level game, because that way people don't have a lot of choices. If you're a fighter, you can hit people with your sword. If you're a mage, you've got a couple of spells you can choose from. If you're a cleric, maybe you can heal someone, maybe you can hit something. So, again, the keeping it simple, but you want to showcase each bit of the game. So D&D, for instance, is exploration, combat, and role-playing. So you want to make sure that your games, or your 4-hour game, has a little bit of each. You know, don't overpower them with combat. Don't overpower them with role playing. If you're supposed to be showing them how D&D works, and it's only got combat in it, that's not really,
Yeah,
you know,
you're doing it wrong.
how D&D. Well, wrong's probably the wrong word, but you're not giving them the full experience of D&D.
Well, I know that there have been times where I've joined someone's kind of one-shot, and I don't know the system at the slightest, and they've given me just this 4-page monstrosity, and I'm looking and saying, okay, so what can I do? I've got all of these words, and I don't really want to spend the first 15 minutes of this game trying to understand what my character can do, and it's not particularly fun.
Yeah, so that's why I say, you know, for certain games, if you're going to have a lot of crunch and you really want to get people going on that, you say experienced players only, please. It will be completely ignored by most people, but at least you've tried. However, the thing to do is, if you're running a crunchy game, well, only run bits of it. So let's say you've got a Traveller. You can say, right, we're not going to do any starship combat in Traveller this game. We're going to make sure there isn't any. There's only the basic combat and talking to people and rolling skills and stuff like that. No starship combat, nothing like that. So you can just make sure that if there is any technical stuff, it's only one set of technical stuff. So if people have to learn something, they just learn the one thing. Won't take them long. Don't give them, do not give them a character who has 40 different things he can do.
Yeah, no, I have an example of that is probably worth mentioning. So, when I first started out with RPGs, I was about 15, 16-ish, I had gone to a convention at the time. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was pre-Dragon Meet. It was the first time I ever went. And I joined a Pathfinder game. It was the first time I ever played Pathfinder. And
crikey.
So I was like, okay, I'm gonna play. I know what. I've heard of. It was still in playtest, I think, when it came out. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna play something new. And so I did. I sat down. I was like, okay, I have at the time I had a very rudimentary understanding of AD&D, which was nothing like Pathfinder. And I sat down with a GM, and he provided me with a character sheet that was nigh on impenetrable. It was about 9 pages of information. Yeah, and I mean, character sheets on their own for new players can be pretty intimidating to look at. There is a lot of information, especially if you have a GM who's made a character for you and they are very particular about the amount of information that's on there. It can become nigh on impenetrable. What's the best way to get around that, do you think, as people that have run convention games?
I think one thing as well is also to pick the system quite carefully. So personally, at conventions, especially for new players, I would not consider doing 3.5 or 3.5 D&D or Pathfinder, just because they are very complex systems for new players.
Never run Anima. Never run Anima.
Yeah, but for instance, when they were bringing Starfinder out, well, they have to run a first level Starfinder game. And so I think the best way around, if you've got a system that is, has got a 400-page rule book, right? You can't even begin to scratch the surface. What you have to do is basically take out most of it and just leave in a couple of bits. So when I do Cthulhu, sometimes when I run it, I don't give the full skill list. I give a list of skills you're good at in the order that you think you're good at, how good you are. But I don't even give you percentages. And so for some people, that works really well, especially new players, because existing players, I'm got 25% in spot hidden or whatever. I know what that means. But just a list of skills, one of which is spot hidden, and a new player goes, what does that mean? Oh, it lets you see something that you might otherwise not notice. Oh, I understand that. And so if you are doing a really crunchy system, one of the things you can do is take the sort of behind the scenes calculations away and just say, roll these dice, I will tell you what that means. And then if you're interested, perhaps after the game, we can go through exactly what that means in game system terms.
Well, it's
'Cause,
also
you know,
like taking on what you said. You can take these more crunchy systems and run things with them. So often the main difference is, like you said, you just need to simplify it down for the front end for the people seeing it. So they're not really interacting with the crunchy parts of the system. They're saying, "I did this. Does it work?" And say, "Yes, it does," or "No, it doesn't."
so for instance, in Pathfinder, if I don't run Pathfinder, but if I was, what I'd probably do is, where the skills were there, I'd literally have a skill and then the number, and I wouldn't have all the calculations that made up how that number was found. It would just say you have 7 in sense motive, and so you say to the person, when you roll a sense motive, roll a d20, add 7, and then the total, the higher the better, and there will be a number against which I will work out whether you've made your sense motive. Whereas if you actually see the character sheet, it's got about 5 different things that go in to make up that number 7 that don't matter. They absolutely don't matter for a one-off.
You can also do things where you kind of just crowbar in or out systems to a degree, if at least just to kind of, if an aspect of the system is just overly complex and not particularly enjoyable, you can just sort of crowbar it out and put some sort of amalgamation in instead, because it's a one-shot. People aren't going to mind if it's not Puritan, so to speak, because I've run... it was Sorcerers of Urtaruk, which is kind of based upon a system called Ars Magica, which anyone who knows it knows that it is very crunch heavy in what you can and can't do, and it solves a lot of those problems, but it's still at times with certain systems a little crunchy. Whereas when I ran it for as a con game, I very much simplified down and was a lot more flexible in what players were able to do with it than the system would actually allow.
Yeah. And that's perfectly fine because it's a one-off, and you're just trying to get people interested in the system. And if they come back, if they go away from it with a good experience and a good memory, and then they go and buy the system, they're not going to come back to you 2 years later and go, "How dare you not have run that game according to the full rule system?" They're going to go, "Oh, okay, that's how you simplify it. Brilliant."
I think that leads quite well onto the next point, which is regarding, especially in a one-shot, the flexibility with the rules. So with these new players, especially looking at how some systems can be very clunky. Some of the things you've mentioned being flexible, and you touched on it before, where if part of it is really difficult and hard to penetrate into, you can simplify it down and use only one part of those, sort of that crunchiness, as it were.
Yeah, or you can effectively hide the crunch from the player. You do all the work. So quite a lot of my games, whether convention or non-convention, I say, "What do you want to do? You tell me," and then I tell you what skill to use and what dice to roll, and sometimes tell you what number you need to get. But it means that that any player who's joined does not have to know the system. They say, "I want to hit the orc," and I say, "Well, you're 40 feet away from it. You could charge up to it and hit it, or you could use your bow, or you could use a spell, or you could try and get into an advantageous position to fight next round. Which of those would you like to do?" And then that's assuming the person has never played before. And then you give them a list of options. "Oh, want to charge up and hit it with your sword." Okay, roll a d20. You need a 15. If you hit, brilliant. And do it that way. You give them lots of options, but basically it boils down to, tell me what you want to do. I'll tell you what you need to roll or do that way, and then we'll work out what happened. And if it's impossible, you say, "I'm afraid it's too far away for that. Would you like to try something else?" So the basic plan would be to hide the difficult calculations from the player. Give him choices he can do and make it simple for him to just make a choice, and then you tell him or her what they need to roll, or if they don't need to roll, you just tell them what happens.
So one of the important things that I think is important for RPGs in general and running games, but in conventions, keep it fun. Assume you want players to come back for more, obviously, and also important is to keep an eye on the time. You are on a heavy time window to get a game finished. I've played in convention games when I did convention games at least. That ended up we would get nowhere near the end because the GM wasn't being assertive enough in pushing the players along. I mean, that kind of happens in games anyway, but I think in conventions and one shots that needs to be heavily policed, but at the same time to try and avoid railroading as well, which I think is important.
Yeah, a tactic you can use is you can have encounters that aren't vital, and basically if the players are enjoying doing one encounter, well, let them do it, but just you'll have to cut out the next encounter in order to let the time work. And if there's something vital in encounter 2 and they're spending all their time in encounter 1, well, let them find the vital thing in encounter 1 after all.
Basically, I was just going to say exactly the same thing, which was especially if you're in a convention and you're keeping an eye on the time, sometimes that can be a bit, you get into your head a little bit too much, go, oh, I need to keep pushing them forward. But you do need to sit back, you do need to let the players, as you say, if they're enjoying what they're doing, don't dampen that by continuously pushing them forward. It's more important in a convention game to keep that forward momentum because you have a definitive end point, generally. Whereas if it's a one-shot game you're running with friends, you can run over more so than in a convention game. So I've had this happen so many times where you're so conscious of the time that you rush people through things. But I think generally with most conventions you've got a good amount of time to work with.
Actually, one thing I wanted to ask all of you, because you all still do run games at conventions, do you use maps, or do you prefer theatre of the mind? Because theatre of the mind is quicker, obviously, but maps are a little bit more physical. You can kind of see more what's going on.
I use a mix of both normally. So sometimes if I'm running at a convention, so I've done this quite a lot at Dragon Meet, where I will have, if there's like an important map of an area, I will have that laid out and let the players do tactically if they so wish. And I normally bring them anyway because some people prefer it. But for the little ones, sometimes, as you said, theatre of the mind can be quicker. And at conventions, that can save time.
I as a GM, am pretty much entirely theatre of the mind. I find it's a lot more flexible because if they decide to go not to the haunted castle via the kind of main entrance, they decide to go around the back, and I haven't prepared a map for that. It's much easier to theatre of the mind that than to very hurriedly scrawl some squares on a piece of paper.
I used to be mostly theatre of the mind. However, I would scrawl a tactical map, usually for the big battle, if there was one. However, COVID has forced me to go online, and therefore the maps are pretty much vital. Now, you don't actually need a tactical map all the time, or for everything, so you can do theatre of the mind. However, you do need much more, especially for any combats, you really do need your map there, because otherwise everyone will be asking, where am I? What's this? What can I do?
Well, you can actually still, it's not, you don't have to have a map in every single case, because I ran Spire earlier under COVID, and that was also entirely theatre of the mind. I think there was a few times where I did a very, this is a square, but it wasn't more of a tracking where everyone was, it was more, this is what the room looks like.
Yeah, I get that in and certainly that's fine for, longer games, but for a one-shot, you really don't want to have a combat where everyone is asking you, where am I, each turn.
It's
so
true.
I think that online for one-shots, I mean, you're absolutely right, offline, I'll just, I'll scroll a square on a piece of paper and put some crosses on and go, you're there, he's there, go. And that's fine. But it's just online games, I found that, especially when you're under time pressure, it's just so much easier to have the map there.
So let's move on to Pregens.
So I think this is my topic, yes. So I've done quite a lot of convention games. So I've done two specific conventions, which are WinterCon and Dragon Meet. And for both of those, if I'm ever running a game, which normally ends up being 5th edition D&D, pre-generated characters are my go-to. Mainly because it allows for me to have a wide variety of characters which I can create, and I laminate them and I just keep them so I've got them for the next time. And it means that anyone that rocks up, I just put all the character sheets on the table and I go, what sort of thing do you want to play? I've got this. Each, like, this can do this ability, and it simplifies things. And I think that it's also when you get someone that rocks up, they'll normally want to sit down and pick a character and play. I'm not opposed to someone bringing their own character, so I had this happen at WinterCon, which is down on the south coast of England. And someone had come up to me in between games, and they said, "Oh, I was wondering if I could use this sort of character," which wasn't one I'd prepared. And I sort of said, "Oh yeah, that's no problem." And in the 10-15 minutes between, I just quickly scratched up a character for them. But no, I think pre-generated characters for conventions are my preferred way to go as well for one-shots, because if these people have no experience of a game, they won't really be able to make a character on their own.
It's also, I guess, for that reason, I would say that really pre-gens for convention specifically are somewhat of a necessity, especially if you're going to, if the system has a very complex system, you're going to want to simplify the character sheet and the information on it as much as possible.
I think
100%.
I think the most important thing for pre-gens, and why you should use them, is usually your adventure will require a mixture of, I don't know, skills, shall we say? There might be a locked door, there might be a magical trap, there might be someone you need to talk to who doesn't speak your language. So if you let everyone rock up with their own characters and you end up, you seem to have 6 barbarians in this party, that's gonna kind of ruin your game if it's all, it's all talky and sneaking around and breaking into vaults. So yeah, pretty much pre-gens are the way to go. However, we're talking about
the idea of 6 barbarians just are dropped into this social intrigue situation in a
It
court.
could be really fun. It could be really fun, but the point is, it's likely that it won't be. But we're talking about trad games here. For indie games, it's the opposite is true. Basically, you turn up and you roll your character up there and then, because basically it takes 5 minutes, and usually the GM doesn't have lots prepared. He just has an idea and some bangs and some scenes he wants to do, and he lets you go. But those games tend to be a lot shorter. They're just as fun, just different sort of role playing. But we are talking about trad role playing here, pretty much. Just thought I'd better point that out.
Yeah. So I think those are all good points. Don't worry too much about spending a huge amount of time making detailed pre-gens, especially for conventions and one-shots. Simplicity is your friend, because it needs to be simple enough the players can understand it. And I usually like to give players a little sheet with it, which normally details some of their abilities and what they're good at, just because it gives the players an idea of what sort of character things they can do, what are they good at, and how does it work. And it means the players have a little bit of reading to do, but it's a lot less than them trying to understand a whole character sheet.
Yeah, no, I agree that. Just that when I run Cthulhu, I tend to minimise the actual stats and things like that, the game-based stuff. But I do tend to put a lot of role-playing based stuff, basically someone's history, why they're there, maybe a secret or two, and how they feel about the other players, which is a little bit of reading at the start, but does mean that you can then play that character. You know where you are, you know what you're doing. So much like you say, a paragraph saying what your character is good at and what they usually do, it gets the players into the mindset of the character they're playing, You're a hotshot pilot, in Star Wars. You're the Wookiee sidekick. You're the mysterious Force user. Oh yeah, I could play that. I know what to do.
I think the other point as well is to make sure the players are happy with their character.
Yeah.
If you've got Pregens and a wide variety of them, it means that a player can pick something they think that they'll enjoy playing. And for one-shots and convention games, they're only going to be there for that one little game. So trying to make sure that they enjoy the character they're playing is definitely something that's really important.
We're going to move on to the next part of this conversation, dealing with single scenarios and short campaigns. These are the kind of games that we tend to run at the Phoenix Games Club. We have, obviously, because of COVID and so on, we've migrated a lot of that to Discord, and it's worked out quite well, I think. But I'll hand it over to the chairman, or the present chairman, Vote Ciaran 2021 for chairman. And yeah, go ahead, dude.
Yes, this is the present chairman, Ciaran. So the way that we run the games at the club is we run things on a cycle system. So this separates the year into basically 10-week cycles. So these are separated into a 6-week and a 4-week game. So the reason why we do this is because 6 weeks and 4 weeks generally gives you enough time to get a nice chunk of story done and character development, and you can introduce lots of different plot points. So we run normally 2 games concurrently with different GMs, and players sign up to these games and join in. Given we moved everything online, it's great. You can sit on your bed and just game all night. It's very fun. But normally we use these because they're short enough that it allows for new players to join these games quite often. So this leads on to sort of the second point and the first point kind of merge together, where these style of games, these single scenarios, so it could span for a few weeks, or short campaigns, so 3, 6, 4 weeks, they're very good for adding new people in. Because quite a lot of the time, you don't want to be playing a campaign at the club for sort of like 10, 15 weeks, because you won't have the ability to add new people in if someone shows up at the club. But yeah, it's mostly what we do. So, for example, I ran a 6-week game of Call of Cthulhu recently, and I had a couple of new people that had joined in with a lot of returning players. So it lets people come back and continue this overarching story, but allows for you to have a set adventure, and you use the same characters and you can continue going through. For shorter games, for 3 weeks, it's also good as almost like a palate cleanser, where you can play a different system of games.
4 weeks.
Oh yeah, you are correct. We changed it, didn't we? So we used to do 3 and 6 weeks, and then we moved to 4 and 6. It worked a little bit better in the cycle of things.
Yeah, we tended to find that 3 weeks wasn't really enough.
And also there'd be a... Sorry, you go.
Me? I wasn't going to say
No,
anything.
Nick. You were saying something. Say.
Yeah, I'll just say, we had for the kind of games that we'd like to run at the club, 3 weeks tended to not be enough. We usually ended up having that last session kind of fast mode to the end. The extra 4 or so hours the game confers on us with the extra session has worked out quite well, and that's mostly also because, at least at the time when we changed the rules, we would have had 3 one-week games interspersed throughout the cycle system. That was, no one really wanted to run anything in there because it's only a 1-week game. So we decided to essentially eliminate those 1-weekers and turn them into 4-weekers. And maybe treading on the feet of the chairman here, I think she should probably finish this sentiment off. So go ahead, sir.
No, it was the committee basically came to a decision that we thought it would be best, as the 1 weekers rarely got used. But yeah, I think that running these sort of single scenario type adventures can work well. It gives a chance for lots of character interaction and lots of different facets to be explored, but it follows much the same principles of designing a one-shot. So I will hand this now over to Andy, who's covering the next point.
Yes, so very, like Ciaran said, this is very similar to kind of like creating the design of a one-shot, only Obviously, instead of having 4 hours, you have between 4 to 6 weeks. So there's still the case of how I tend to look at it is you still have these key steps in the story. It's just there are going to be a lot more of them, and it's going to be somewhat more detailed. So to give an example of a game I ran previously, so Trinity, which I ran, I think it was last year. The first time I ran it, we had so the players had been sent to look into a disappearance. So I was like, okay, scene 1, is the briefing. That one's always going to happen because I need to tell the players what they're doing. And then moving on from there, they're most likely going to head to the location. So what areas might they go to in there? And then how is that going to then tie? What are they going to find to then move them on to the next area? And it was kind of creating these kind of little spider diagrams of if they go here, what's going on. And it wasn't like these sort of things were massively fleshed out at the start, because, like we've said before, don't over-prepare. But at the same time, you need to sort of understand roughly what's going on. What are the villains doing at this point? What are the players over there doing at this time? And I kind of had certain set scenes in there that I kind of wanted to happen. So this is including the bit where they confront the mastermind who was working behind the scenes. Ciaran looks like he could say a lot about that.
Yes. Hated him.
There was also a section where the players were meant to be looking into. It's like someone on one of the NPCs had a brother, and they had information, and at some point they were going to interact with them. But it was whether the brother was there and they could ask him stuff, or had been kidnapped, would depend upon things that happened previously along. So it's kind of like this almost spider diagram of where to get to.
I think it's very similar with sort of, irrespective of the system that you're using, I tend to find that it's a good idea, as you said, to plan out the important scenes. Sometimes, though, over-preparing can be your downfall. So for Call of Cthulhu, one of the ways I went about it was I knew generally how I wanted it to end. You want a big, triumphant confrontation, which the party had, which was very dramatic and ended up in a player death caused by a player. But we'll get to that at some point, I'm sure. But I made sure that I didn't plan the minutiae of everything, because especially if you're running these games, sometimes the players just won't go where you expect. But make sure that you've got in your head, what are my villains doing? What's the background stuff that's happening, and how can the players affect and interact with that?
It's also, you can use this to sort of plan in advance, what social intrigue is going on, what kind of the hook, the main hook, what's do the party need to infiltrate a court? Do they need to break into a location? You can sort of get an idea of what do you sort of need to prepare for, because you can also then help prepare the players beforehand, such as if you notice no one can pick a lock. That either means that you either need to do away with the lock picking section, or maybe subtly suggest to someone some sort of skullduggery skills might be an idea.
Or they could hire someone, which will then lead to more interaction and fun. But you have time to do it in a 4 to 6 week game, whereas you don't in a one-shot.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about using new players into games. There's, there are several right ways to do this, I think. But I have a particular example that I want to bring up, which is the Star Wars game I'm currently running. We do have a few people currently in the call that are in there. Spon is one of them. We have a few listeners that are also in there. I believe one other is. Hello, by the way. So this is the first time I've run Star Wars in a long time, or any kind of really hard Star Wars at least. And so I was easing myself into it as well. And I mean, the session went well. There was a minor disaster with lighting and the new rules in Roll20, which kind of caused a bit of a problem and a panic. But I managed to fix it. And given that we had one or two other people that had never played Star Wars as an RPG before as well, I think it was also helping them ease into the game. Unfortunately, that game turned into an epic display of faffing around by players, which went very well.
So just to so in terms of like easing the new players in, so was there what kind of like preparations did you do for helping this, or was it just kind of like the sort of mindset of we're all sort of learning?
Yeah. So. For this game at least, because everyone that was playing is reasonably experienced with RPGs anyway, so that they are more they have an easy time being eased into a new game. I've actually been trying to get my younger brother to join in for the next 2 weeks, who has never played RPG before. I have a perfect way to insert him into the game as well and kind of ease him into the whole thing. But I tend to start whenever I run a game like this. I tend to start fairly light. I'll give the players significant latitude to kind of just like speak with each other and do some RPing. I will be there with them as they roll up characters, and we can come up with some kind of story, or kind of insert some new strategies into it. I'm going to want to talk about this a bit later as well, because I did make some interesting decisions when it came to character gen in terms of giving players the opportunity to play what they want rather than what the rules say they could have. Does that make sense?
Well, this also, I think, ties a little into something we've mentioned both earlier this episode and the previous episode as well, in that when players are rather new, you can be a little flexible with some of the rules, so they're not blown away by the big wall of text that is some certain systems.
Oh, definitely. I mean, well, actually, an example for in this case at least is, so the game I'm running specifically is Star Wars Saga Edition, which is, in my opinion at least, the second best edition of a Star Wars RPG that was ever made. The absolute pinnacle of Star Wars, in my opinion, was the West End Games version of Star Wars, which is very old now. It was the in thing in the mid to late 90s, I want to say. And then the Star Wars Saga Edition came out, which was based on D20, but it was a lot better. It was based on third edition third edition D&D, which had its own problems, but it was modified quite extensively to take the best from third ed and insert their own things into it, and it worked very well. The game is out of print now, but it is absolutely worth playing.
Slight tangent, but isn't that the same base rule set as Knights of the Old Republic 1?
I think Knights of the Old Republic used D20 revised, which was a system that came out before that. There are minor differences between the two systems, but so one of my players wanted to play a Terra's Cassie. So for those of you that don't know much about Star Wars lore, Terra's Cassie are the best way to think about them would be like a Shaolin monk, almost. They are martial artists first and above all.
I feel like I'm going to get a lot of flack from this from people that like Star Wars, but aren't Jedi essentially already monks?
They are, although Jedi tend to be more spiritual, and Terra's Cassie not necessarily are involved in that. But in this game at least, Terra's Cassie is an archetype a player can go down, but it is a prestige class. So it's not something you can take immediately genning the character, which was a bit of a problem for his concept at least. It would have required him to be, I think, minimum of 8th level, and then he had to be a trooper class, which is the kind of general soldier for Star Wars Saga. So I made some modifications. I let him spec into the tree before he was able to, and it worked out quite well. He was very happy with it. I'm very happy with it. It's a minor change, but I tend to be pretty open to those kind of changes anyway. As many of you should know from playing in my games previously, we can come up. I'm very happy to come up with flavorful reasons why something might be different. yeah, that's one thing I want to do. Even new players and old players, I want to ease them into. I want them to feel like they're getting their way, where it makes sense for them as a for their concept of whatever they're playing, even if they're new and they don't understand the game.
Yeah, I think that it is very important to let players play the character they want. You shouldn't overpower them or give them stuff that will make them shine all the time and put other characters into the shade, but if they really want to play a particular character and the rules say, I'm sorry you can't, well, change it a bit, you know?
It's kind of like reskinning something for a player, because it doesn't have to be exactly as sort of like the lore allows it, but sometimes you can just reskin something to match the sort of thing a player wants. I mean, some things they just won't be able to play, like as in if they want some random creation out of their own head. But if it's going, oh, I wanted to play this sort of this monk archetypal style race, you can try and reskin something similar so it's thematically different but mechanically the same.
Yeah, I did actually make that change for. I think it was one of Andy's characters in my Pathfinder game. Actually, I think it was your noble drow. You wanted something. I can't remember what it was, but it was something thematically that made sense as a drow to take. But the spell was slightly different, and you wanted to word it in more of a way where you would capture a soul. I can't remember what it was. I think it was you wanted to capture a. Do you remember?
Yeah, so it was essentially the character when they were kind of like, well, they were a class which was called an oracle, which was meant that they kind of got revelations from deities, and the entire idea was that there was this kind of like, wasn't so much a prestige class, but it was like a class feature you could choose to take, like optional class feature, which was all about binding spirits and being all happy and friendly with them, so they grant you your abilities. And I was like looking at it saying, I kind of think this is cool. However, this is not what a dark elf would do. The dark elf would be more along the lines of like just hitting them with a hammer and saying, "You're going to give me power now. Going to give me power now," until they eventually acquiesce. And so that's kind of what I was trying to flavour it as.
Yeah, and we modified it to a point where it made more sense in terms of character, and I tend to like doing that. It gives it gives the players more engagement with the game that they maybe knew. It also gives them more of a personal attachment to their character, where they know that they will have this extra bit of latitude. But once once they are confident, and we start introducing big hard man fights and increasingly more difficult situations for them to be in when they are more confident, depending on the game that is. But it's something I like to do. So we are going to move on now to something Spon wanted to talk about in regards to offering tough challenges to players.
Yeah, so when we're talking about the one shot, basically you get the players to the end, you make sure they survive to the end, and then in the final conflict, the dice decide who lives and dies. In a slightly longer game, you don't really want to kill people off in the first week, but equally you don't want to make it so that they know they're gonna, anything we can do will survive to the final week. So you want to challenge your players, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lethal challenge, but you've got time to make it more interesting is probably the wrong word, but more challenging. You can basically give the players a chance to come up with interesting ways to get around problems. And one thing I've learnt is don't have an idea in mind when you're solving a problem. Put problems up and let the players solve it. Don't make it absolutely impossible, because then they'll never solve it. But there's a chasm over a raging river, and the rope bridge has been cut. You've got to get over the chasm. Well, they might fly. They might try and go round. They might have a way of I don't know, shooting an arrow across and doing some sort of trickery to get a rope across there. Let them decide, give them a challenge and let them overcome it.
Well,
And
it's
they'll
also,
surprise you. They'll surprise you.
So it's also in the same sort of line. If you get to a puzzle and you're like, okay, this is a solution, you often find you might zero down on this one thing and just kind of entirely disregard. So the situation, either you're going to get blindsided by the players doing something you don't expect, or the players then get frustrated because, as far as they're seeing, they can't see your solution, and so they can't see any solution. And they feel like, well, it's impossible.
We've tried 8 different things and you've said no each time. Well, why do we bothering? Exactly. Let them come up with a solution. And if it's reasonable, we'll go with it. You don't have to say, yes, of course it works. You can say, well, it works, but there's a price to pay. Hey, we're going to summon a demon to carry us across the chasm. Okay, but you're going to have to pay the demon in blood or in treasure and whatever,
Like in my Call of... Oh, I was going to say, like in my Call of Cthulhu game, at the end, the players needed to do this ritual. And there was an option for them to sacrifice an innocent, which could be a child or someone who hadn't killed someone, they weren't 100% sure. And another option as well, or in addition, was to sacrifice an eye. The party knew of this, and it was a way they could have solved it. They elected not to, but an eye got taken anyway. So, but yeah, I agree. Try not to make the challenge or the puzzle too complex that it makes, because it might make sense in your head, but to the players it looks like gibberish.
Well, I do wish to point out that in my game I'm running at the moment, it took an hour for people to remember in a time-traveling game they have time machines.
Yeah, in a 4 to 6 week game, that's okay. Again, going back to if you're in a one shot, it's up to the GM to go after 10 minutes to go, you've got time machine, guys. Because, yeah.
Oh, of course. How could I forget the time machine?
Some people do.
I think another good point to make is, so for example, Spon runs Call of Cthulhu for us sometimes. And especially with Cthulhu, eventually you're going to die or go insane. It's not basically going to happen tomorrow, but eventually that will happen. Might not be this game, but it will happen eventually. So I think that with some systems, you don't be afraid to kill the players, but they need to be given a chance to survive. There needs to be a way for the problem to be solved. If it's except in very specific games, if it's an unwinnable situation, it's fun for no one, because the players will look at it and go, what's the point in us trying then? But no, I think another good thing is if a player is missing a session, don't kill them or incapacitate them. Just kind of let them, the way that most of us, all of us do it, is just let them fade into the background.
Yeah, with players not there, I've never been a big fan of having the player's character involved in any sort of way. I know some GMs will have them around, but then it gets super awkward when you're talking to the player when they're back and it's like, by the way, great you're back, your character's dead.
Or unconscious.
Yeah, I'll keep them around only if they're, let's say, they're the rogue and there's a locked door going to be involved, because otherwise the party can't get any further. But other than that, yeah, they won't take part in combats. They won't be mentioned in any role playing. They'll just kind of they've gone away for the week, wherever that is, and then they mysteriously come back. And I think it's cool because you've got a group of 6 players, well, up to 6 players, over up to 6 weeks. The chances are, you're going to be missing 1 or 2 players each week, really. So you have to be able to cope with the fact that some people won't be there, and yeah, it's a bit rude to hurt their character when they're not there.
I just wanted to bring up a poignant example of how an interesting way to run a game with half the players missing. And Spon did this. It's about a year ago with his Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition game that he runs at the club. Which he had, for most of the sessions he had a full table, but there was one week in particular where I think half the party was missing, and we ended up progressing the campaign that we were playing, but we ended up doing something completely different. Could you talk about a bit of that, kind of what happened?
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether we knew there was going to be a lot fewer people or not, but I kind of had a side quest ready for people if they wanted to go to a bit. It wasn't fully fleshed out, but basically it was there in case you wanted to do it. So, quick explanation: there's a island in the middle of a lake. They're going out there to explore it. Mysterious temple on it. I do lots of mysterious temples on lakes. It's works really well. There'd been a comet that had crashed recently that basically plunged into the temple and damaged it. There's also another bit of a comet that had gone underwater. And so I believe that the plan for the party, when there were 6 of them, was to go to the temple. But because there were only 3, I kind of steered them in the direction of, well, you could go and look at the one that's underwater. And they happily went off on a side quest, found, in D&D, found a traveller spaceship and explored it. And it was, it wasn't very big. You found some funky stuff. There were, maybe half a dozen rooms. There was weird stuff to find. It was quite cool, right? Well, people enjoyed it, they seemed to,
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. I found some grenades, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
We had some power armor.
Yes.
That barely worked, but it worked. And there was a few other things, but no, it was an interesting way of dealing with missing half the players, which is an unfortunate reality of running games. Occasionally, we are going to be missing players.
Yeah, and I think if you know you're going to be missing a couple of players, you can do side quests. Just like a one shot almost in the middle of the game, but for less players. Again, if you don't know, if you turn up and half your players are missing, it's difficult to do that. But if you know there's going to be a couple of people missing, yeah, give the people who turn up something nice. Yeah, you've turned up. Let's have a little game.
Yeah. I mean, well, there is nothing worse than coming back after missing a game and, oh, by the way, you're unconscious now.
Oh, yeah.
It's not fun.
No, really isn't.
Yeah, I think we'll leave that there. So, for the final point for this segment, at least, Andy.
Yeah, well, I think this one is probably the most important thing. Both generally and philosophically, is that keep it fun and enjoy yourself. If the players aren't enjoying it, they're not having fun. You're probably not going to then have fun. If you're not having fun, then the players are probably not going to have fun. If everyone's having fun, all's well.
Sorry, one thing I did want to point out is that because it's a slightly longer game, you've got time if someone doesn't seem to be having fun, after a session to take them aside and actually ask them, say, hey, what was wrong with that? Or what weren't you enjoying? And often it won't be anything you've done, I've just had a bad day. But sometimes it'll be like, well, I've made a character and, he's supposed to be the face and there's this other player who's always doing the face stuff and he's better than me. And it gives you a chance to go, okay, well, we'll fix that. We'll either change your character or we'll make sure there's a chance for you both to shine next time rather than just them.
Well, actually, so this is something that I've actually done in a game. I did a Nyx Pathfinder game. So,
You did?
Yes. I think because we got to a certain point where, because of certain, like we've mentioned this previously, the game was essentially a challenge to break my system, if we remember that. And we kind of got to a point where, what I was supposed to be good at, I wasn't really doing a lot of because I was the face. But when it came to combat, most of my turns was very much, well, I do this thing, and that's it. And I didn't really feel like I was really pulling the weight, so I kind of talked to Nick, and we kind of worked out a way to kind of like change the character around a little bit to make them relevant.
Yeah, and it did. The game will return at some point, so we can finish that combat that the game had to abruptly end on. But one thing I wanted to bring up, just in terms of keeping it fun and enjoying yourself. Also, in that same D&D game, my character Slab got feeble-minded.
It was a different week, but yeah.
Yeah, I was perfectly cordial and understanding that obviously he has been feeble-minded, and so now Slab is going to, given Slab's personality and character as it is, was a bit of a problem in terms of RPing because he's a very simple character, but I became a little bit annoyed by the that entire session where I was essentially being a kind of Diet Coke antagonist of the party.
Well, you got feeble-minded. Given Slab wasn't very intelligent, we barely noticed.
I know, that was the best thing. I was just RPing it, and nobody noticed I was being a problem. Until by the end of it, I was just kind of sitting back, and I'm like, this isn't fun, because I'm just I'm kind of being forced to be a bit of a problem for the party, rather than having occasionally some use. I couldn't even do combat, which was the thing he was good at.
Being a problem for the party.
But you talked to me afterwards and said, "Hey, can we change this?" I said, "Yeah, let's change it." You know?
And he was still feeble-minded, but we came up with a way for it to be more fun for me as a player to play.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which was good, and I was very happy with it.
Yeah, and the main thing, it's going to sound like a marriage counsellor there. Communication. Talk to your players. If they don't look happy, or they're silent or whatever, talk to them. And the worst they can say is, "Well, I had a really good time." Or if they say, "I'm never playing again," well, they're never playing again. At least you tried.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was. I was very happy with the resolution on that. But it was my character's own fault. I'm playing Slab as I would imagine Slab to be.
Mm.
So what happened to him was the result of his own actions. It was just I needed a way for it to become less obviously that I'm annoying the party, and find a way so that I can just kind of be annoying in the background. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and we fixed it. It was cool.
Yeah.
I think we fixed it by you being a 6-year-old child, basically, rather than 4, or basically just dribbling in the corner. But
I feel like
anyway.
the person in question here is is he still feeble-minded?
Who knows? No one can tell.
He has a surname now, so that's good.
Yes. Oh yeah. He found his history, didn't he? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, moving on. Something I wanted to talk about. Events in the world. When you're running a campaign, you've got a campaign world that you're in. Whether that world is actually a city, a street, an entire world, a continent, whatever it is, it's got to kind of feel real. And the way to make your characters are important in that game, but they're not necessarily the most important, but they have to feel that they're important. So if you're going to have events happening in the world, and you should, have them affect the world, and have the players be able to interact with them if they want to.
And also to call them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If the players do something absolutely crazy and major, we're going to open the
Ninth Gate of Hell.
Yes, we've got this thing. Open the Gate of Hell. Cool. We open the Gate of Hell. Well, there's going to be demons and devils running around in your campaign for a while, and that will affect the world around. So, for instance, in my game at the moment, there's a war going on. The players aren't directly interacting with the war, but the fact is the war's going on. So when they go, "Oh, we want to find a sage," I go, "Well, no, we want to go to the capital to find a sage. Capital's under siege. No sages there. We'll have to go elsewhere, find our information." Now, you haven't stopped them finding information, but they have to go elsewhere. It kind of makes the world feel a bit real. Things are happening,
So I was just going to say there were two little points, which was one thing I remember that I did that affected the world in your game was there was this lovely, hopefully you can hear the air quotations, witch called the Good Witch,
The Good
who
Witch,
was so lovely and helpful and nice, and I immediately distrusted her, as you always do with old women in RPGs. We brought this point up before, never trust them.
Never trust
And
them.
she was so lovely and helpful, I didn't trust her. So I poked, and we found out these children were getting sequestered away to an orphanage to get trained as assassins, which I thought was basically sort of despicable. And I said to this good witch, I said, but that's horrible, isn't it? Like, that you're complicit with these children going. She goes, oh, I know, it's terrible, isn't it? And I knew she was lying. So I, at like 3rd level, point blank range, went, I blast her. And it was, the party went, what are you doing? And I went, can't let her get away with this. And then later on, everyone was going, oh no, we need help. The Good Witch is gone. Someone killed her. And I'm there going, oh crap, that was me. But it let me interact with the world.
And to be fair, the Good Witch wasn't particularly good. You know?
Exactly. Night Hat. The second point I was going to make was in my Monday game of D&D, I do something similar. So one of the members in the party wanted to create an item, and the spells they needed to craft into it were only known to druids. So the party, he started going, I'm going to see if I can find a druid. And I said, druids are going to be rarely going to offer their services, and they're reasonably rare, but you can see if you can find one. And then the party found out that all the druids have suddenly started travelling east from everywhere. North that they've all started travelling east. And the party then found out that for the first time in a century, all of the druids are meeting, and no one quite knows why. But the world, as you said, you make it feel more dynamic to the players and give it festivals and holidays and parties and funerals, and it lets the players feel like the world is I know it's an RPG, but it makes it feel real.
Yeah, that's how it should be for a campaign. A campaign should feel like if the players disappeared tomorrow, the world would still go on. That's how it should feel to the players. Obviously, they don't want to disappear tomorrow because that'd be rubbish. But...
Well, also one thing that our chat's helpfully brought up is that the kind of consequences from these things should not only be negative, they also be positive. So, you've overthrown the evil tyrant. You are now known as being like a hero of the land, so to speak. It doesn't have to be sort of negative connotations. And the other thing I was also bringing up is that there's a lot of things where the party have changed things in the world in Ciaran's game. There's a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was going to lead into making players relevant to the story, but we kind of just covered that.
Well, yeah. The point is, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Nick. You say your bit.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that we were going to move on to that and have a brief discussion on it, but we have literally just covered that entire point pretty much. So yeah, I think we'll move on from there to endings or conclusions, not necessarily endings, but concluding big plots or concluding
okay, there's
important events.
There's two kind of things that happen in campaigns. One is they just fizzle out, and you have to be prepared for that. It's not a good ending, but it happens.
It's an unfortunate consequence.
It's an unfortunate consequence of people moving away. You're like, the GM goes, "Yeah, I'm moving to Scotland." Things like that. So, if you have time, even if you're in the middle of a world-spanning campaign, you're supposed to save the world. The GM had an idea that it would happen, maybe in a year's time, sometime in the future, and suddenly it's got to end in a month. Well, you don't have to end it the way you thought it was going to end, but you can give it it's nice and a long-running campaign to give it a bit of closure. It doesn't have to be, as I say, it doesn't have to be a big boss fight, anything like that. If you get to the end of a campaign, awesome, have that big boss fight, have that final thing where You know, everyone's praying for the cleric to roll a 16 or more on his last d20 as his spell tries to, shatter the stone that's summoning the god of doom. Cool. If you can do that, that's brilliant. But you're not guaranteed it. Long-running campaigns quite often just fizzle out. So I'm just saying, if you think if it's likely to happen, it's happened to me a couple of times. My way of doing it is, it's almost like we'll park it. Yeah, we'll come to an end, but it's like, oh, this is the end of season 1. Season 2's coming, at some point in the future. There are questions to be answered, can you do it? But give some sort of closure to the people who are playing, if you can.
Well, it's also, and also in that same regard, don't if you know it's going to come to a close because someone's leaving, you don't have to rush the ending. There's been multiple things in pop culture where there's been a rushed ending and it's ruined the entire thing.
Absolutely.
Game for it.
I mean, if one person's leaving your campaign, well, one person leaves the campaign. And what I'm saying is, if it's when there's a big, for instance, we all seem to have left college at the same time, and we're all moving away. Well, I guess this campaign's coming to an end. If you know that's going to happen, you only need maybe 2-3 weeks to give it an end. It doesn't have to be the end forever, but an end, a season end,
Well, fortunately, with the advent of the internet, that's something that I think is less of a problem now. At least in a lot of the campaigns I was involved in before.
Well, yes and no. I agree with you in terms of leaving leaving college, but people having babies, for instance.
Oh yeah.
Especially when it's the GM, that's going to kill the campaign for a long time. So, however, the good thing is usually the GM knows approximately when the baby's going to arrive, so he can usually finesse a season ending, shall we say.
Well, there are entire memes around trying to organise regular role-playing games and the inability for people to link up their schedule.
Yeah. The point is that usually when you get a campaign going, everyone's schedule works for a while. And if one person changes, well, okay, one person leaves. Maybe get some more people in. But if it's when several people go at the same time, then you go, right, campaign's got to end effectively. But if you know that's going to happen, yeah, don't rush it, but try and give yourself a season ending. You hope you'll pick it up in the future. Maybe you probably won't, but who knows?
I think we've talked a lot about when campaigns fizzle. I think it might be a good idea to also talk about when a campaign does reach its ending, the ending that you intend, sort of the way that you would hope to end a campaign for everyone, where they vanquish the evil, they've saved the world, and to make sure that the players feel like they are heroes, feel like they've made a difference. Because of them, this campaign is finished.
Well, I think the one thing I always say for those sort of endings is, because you're coming to a finale, turn everything up to 11.
Yeah, that always works.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree.
In long-running campaigns that I've done, there are 4 campaigns that I've run that have come to an end. One of them being a previous Pathfinder campaign that I ran with the club. Andy was in, but Ciaran and Spon were not. So that game ended quite organically. The big bad did kind of turn into a bit of I don't know how to other like a snowball of failures where he just kept losing, but he kept coming back, and it was quite good. But two of the campaigns that I've ended, the campaign ended with fighting the final boss dude, but they lost, and they ended up dying. Usually not for me being a hard ass and like throwing open like a combat that was unwinnable usually ended up happening as a result of them failing horribly. You know, as the now meme of the club, I do not fumble, which is a.
I think you'll find, sir, you do.
I think it has happened twice now. But yeah, two of my long-running campaigns that I ran outside of the club have ended in a TBK. I mean, that is an ending. It's not a good ending, really, but I think in some cases where the rolls just, you know, the dice know what the dice know, and you just kind of accept
There was one campaign, a pre-written one anyway, but it's sort of how it ended. It was Curse of Strahd, and as you can probably tell, they ended up facing Strahd.
Is this the
difficulty... Yes. The difficulty was that one of the party members, two of them actually, got enticed by Strahd. And he said, if you betray them, I will let you live, and I'll give you all of these pretty shiny things, and you'll go away. They were meant to say no. One of them said yes, and ended up at the most opportune moment, betraying the party, killing 3 of them in a round. Yeah. And at that point, the two remaining party members, one was unconscious and one was still up because he was a monk and he'd avoided the damage. And he just went, he killed the man I love. I'm going to charge at Strahd. And at that point, I faded to black. It wasn't the ending I expected, but it was climactic.
Hey.
So I think that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you're running an RPG list, the party should win at the end, and they should, you know, otherwise, they are the protagonists. They are there to affect the ending and provide. But sometimes the players do lose. Or sometimes we end up in situations that we have mentioned in the previous episode with Ciaran's Mummy the Curse game that ended in PvP, which was an epic ending, and I was very happy with that ending. Although the game's not over, I think we can continue on close. One of our friends here that is listening in, Tom, is a pivotal point in it. We ended up fighting him, but he did succeed in the end. It was quite good.
The party ended up siding with the evil guy, and but I think it was good when you've got a villain who has a proposal. He's got a motive which the players can actually empathise with. Two of the party went, actually, he's making a lot of sense.
Yeah, sorry.
So actually, we have another comment from chat, which is actually again a good idea. Is that one thing to be careful of when kind of preparing these kind of climaxes is to, like, if you're going to kind of plotting it out what you want to different things, and you kind of say, okay, it's too early to do this. You also need to go into the idea that if you say, oh, it's too early for us to do this because I want to build it up later. If the campaign then does fizzle, or things don't quite go the way you want to do, you might miss the chance to ever use it. So.
Oh yeah, but another thing, foreshadowing in campaigns works brilliantly. So it literally, I want to use this thing. I want to use the fact that the key to the Vault of Time is actually dangerous to those who use it. And the key to the Vault of Time contains the thing you want. So you can have an entire couple of scenarios or a couple of weeks based around the key to the Vault of Time, which is really cool, a really cool thing, and brings stuff in for the game. Even if you never get to the Vault of Time, it exists in the world. It brings the characters in, it makes the world feel more real. So yeah, you're absolutely right there, Andy. The thing is, if you have stuff you want to bring in, but you don't want to bring it in as a major thing, foreshadow it. That way, at least it arrived a little way into the game.
And if you do it right, when it actually comes into the front, then everyone will sit back and go, oh yeah, that was...
As Ciaran was saying earlier, something that happened 3 months ago, so wait a minute, oh, it's back in. That's cool. And that's the beauty of long-running games. So I just wanted to say a couple of other things for the endings. So if you've got an apocalyptic ending, a brilliant thing, So, as people said, don't pull the punches. But it's nice if you give the players a couple of, basically boost buttons on your computer game, on your Xbox.
Oh, shut them down, so to speak.
Give them power-ups that they wouldn't normally happen. So do they? If they're facing off against Demogorgon, give them something that's really good specifically against Demogorgon. Yeah.
Well, this is actually I did something like this in the conclusion of the second, so to speak, second season of my Trinity game. In that in the fight against the kind of last boss, I kind of threw in a thing which characters have like a power stat, and I just artificially boosted it by an amount and said, "Okay, go crazy."
Yeah, and I'd say building on that, it's good when they've gone deliberately to find the way to get that bonus. For instance, in a campaign you can do that. In a short game you just give them the bonus, but in a long game, you're on the side quest. We've come back with Demogorgon's dirty underpants or whatever they are. Oh well, you find out. I think you'll find if you throw them at him, he's weakened. But you've spent the time to go and get that thing to do it, which is, it works into the campaign, it does great stuff. The second point I wanted to make was, if you win, well, give the players their, the end of Star Wars: A New Hope, when they all walk down and get your medals, and everyone, praise them with great praise. Seriously, have you ever given a character a medal in a game? I have. They love it. The medal doesn't do anything, but you give them the medal. They go, the starburst for what was it? For incredible heroism, or the starburst for suicidal heroism. I think they gave them. They wear it.
A medal in the game.
And then one guy got it and bar. They got it twice, right? For doing absolutely crazy things. But the king went, And the thing was, in game, there were no stats for it. It didn't do anything. It had no magic. But he walks around and says, "You're the guy who." Okay. Well, of course you can. Sit down. Come to the coffee shop and all that. In game, it's amazing. And the thing is that if you're gonna have it, remember, this is kind of not necessarily the end of the campaign, but during the campaign. You don't have to give them magic. You don't have to give them gold. You can give them things that work in campaign, and they'll love it.
Well, another one just along that same lines that is a usual trope in fantasy is just at the end of it, the king's like, "Well, you're now nobles because you did that great. Here's your lands. Here's your mansion."
Usually crumbling and in the middle of the orc realms, but hey. Yeah,
I think this does bleed quite nicely into our next point, which was about, we touched on it as well, which was giving the players closure with their characters, letting them have at least an end to their characters. So one of our listeners tonight, Tom, I was in his 3.5e game. I joined quite late. I'd been running for 7 years, and I joined in the last year. And when it got to the end and we'd saved the world, as you normally do in these games, there were basically RP sections which were given to each player of what their characters did, what they went on and accomplished, sort of what their ending was. And I think especially for these long-term campaigns, having an ending for these characters is really satisfying. It's sad that this character's gone, but it's nice to know that that character did good. As in, this is how they ended.
One of the also really nice things, or things I really like, especially in a campaign setting, is where when a character has ended their arc, they've retired, they've become a noble, but later on when you have a new character, your character is referenced or comes up, it's you here is this statue of this great hero, and you're like, that was my character.
Yeah. But that's going up. Usually that happens in, almost like episodic campaigns. But that's a whole new thing. I'm not going to talk about that right now. But
Indeed. But,
all good stuff.
With at least our final point that Ciaran introduced, giving players closure, I think, depending on the way the game runs, that can end in a variety of different ways. Generally, in campaigns I've been a part of, the character I was playing tended to just kind of come up with a and they go off in their own victory, and over the years they'll continue to do more and more of what they were doing. Or if you're going to go down a particularly dark route with one of my old AD&D characters, who essentially became Hades because we killed Hades because he was being a problem for that entire game. So I'm just like, yeah, no. And I was a necromancer, so it worked out well. Some of the time about sort of my some of my characters' closure is that they died.
Yeah,
it happened on Sunday, in fact, last week. I wasn't intending him to die there, but he died. So,
I mean, yeah, it happens. It happens a lot in Cthulhu.
It's Call of Cthulhu, so I'm okay with that. So I didn't want him to die there because I quite liked the character. Roll your con save. Do not cock this up because you will die. And I don't fumble. I never fumble.
No. Except for the week before when he killed me.
Yeah, no, I definitely do not ever fumble. And I have, but by the rights of the dice gods, I fumbled. So yeah, he was dead. That's fine. Closure doesn't have to be long, drawn out thing. It can just be a single event that just kind of gives you a good ending.
However, on a similar note, shall we say, you're in Ciaran's game when my character died, possibly due to your fumbling. Who can say?
I do not fumble.
It was nice that at the end, after the death, it was always gave him we gave him a seeing off, as it were. We had a burial and all that sort of stuff. It was nice, it was like, wow, hasn't really happened before in the Cthulhu game I've been in. That's brilliant. Usually we just go, oh, another one's dead, right, roll up a new character, right, off we go. Usually because the deaths are in horrible ways and don't end in, oh, we've won, brilliant.
I'm never going to be allowed to live that down.
No.
Not to poke the bear, but could we get a little more of an in-depth description of what happened?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because we are going to be recording a special segment after the segment is finished, where we're going to talk about the last games that we ran. So for those of you that may be listening, there are going to be 2 separate uploads to our YouTube page, where we will be speaking, I will be speaking with Ciaran, who ran Call of Cthulhu for a 6-week game that rounded out the year, as well as Tom, who ran Exalted. And we're just going to get a general description of the game, what players played, and how the game went. So those will be uploaded. We're going to record those separately after the end of this podcast, which is coming up now.
Spoiler warning.
This episode ran on a bit longer than I think we intended to, but nevertheless, thank you everybody for watching and listening. We haven't quite decided if we're going to do another episode on the coming Friday. We might. Otherwise, the next episode will be recorded and uploaded for the 18th of December. We'll be skipping Christmas, obviously, which will be the first episode that will be coming after that. Will be on New Year's Day, unless there are sometimes we can work out, but we can come up with something around then. Nevertheless, everybody, thank you for listening, and gentlemen, thank you for taking part. I have been Nick, your host, along with Ciaran, Andy, and Spon. Thank you for listening, and I will see you guys soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.